Hey guys, Rob from Georgia here with you, aka VHS82 apostrophe with episode 12. My favorite number, man. War of the Coprophages. You'll never know how long. I could not wait to get that out. It's the latest episode, directed by Kim Manners. Dropped our first episode of 1996, January 5th. Writing Darin Morgan, his third episode, Humbug and Clyde Bruckman. So we got a good pair here. This one you have to assume is going to be a pretty good episode, and boy, it did not disappoint. Loosely translated, this is my translation based on what I've read and my understanding of the episode. War of the Dung Eaters. How about that? That's so much easier to say, War of the Dung Eaters. Because really what you have here it seems, what you have here at the central point of this episode is an infestation of cockroaches feasting off of dung at a plant that utilizes dung. What did we call that? I even wrote it down. Maybe I didn't. What they're doing is looking to see how you can retrieve methane from dung. And so apparently what comes along with the latest shipment is a species of cockroaches not normalized in this community. And their presence seems to set off, now this is my further interpretation, a hallucinogenic quality that it's like once the first domino goes, it becomes a shared hallucination amongst the greater area. You think of, you've heard stories in World War II when those sailors who were adrift in a raft and dying of thirst, those who would succumb to drinking the salt water would begin to have suffer from hallucinations. And like, for an example, they would look down into the water and think they see a running creek, and therefore they would want to dive off and go after this elusive freshwater source, which is not there. But others would share in that hallucination and go with. And sometimes you'd have a group of sailors, they just never come back, man. They just keep swimming and who knows, probably get eaten by sharks or something. I don't know, man. But I'm a little bit of experience with the power of suggestion or hallucination. When I was in the Army, the 4 years in the infantry, I remember at times on a pretty long hump throughout the middle of the night, you just get so fatigued, so tired, man. You could be walking in the middle of the woods and the trees start to take on forms of houses, man. I remember this one time I literally thought we were walking in to the middle of a town, and I grabbed my buddy in front of me. I'm just like, what town is this, man? I didn't know we were gonna hit a town. And he was just looking at me like, are you insane? I'm like, dude, Chet, look at the houses. And no houses, man. It was just, that was how tired I was. I've had experience a little bit, so I could sort of relate a little bit. This is one of those weird qualities where even by the end of the show, you're not really given a full account of really what was happening here. It all begins with, we have a list of characters who are pretty good. Maybe the three or four most important here. Dr. Eckerl, who probably begins, he's probably the one who sets the first domino in motion. He's got an exterminator. Now this is where, I think there just seems to be a real tapping into arachnophobia. It came out in 1990, Frank Marshall film. because the exterminator seems to be sort of really playing off John Goodman's character, which is interesting, and it's just his mannerisms and stuff. But this guy really believes, I mean, and he may have cockroaches in his house, but this exterminator also sees them, so they may be there, may not be there, and in the midst of that, he will end up dying of what is anaphylaxis? There's 2 accounts of this in the episode, and once the guy comes back, Dr. Icaro comes back down. Now he's the guy who works at the dung plant. He's the one that is studying, can we pull methane out of dung, right? So it begins with him and ends with him. He is the bookend of the episode. And this will just set off, like I said, a domino effect. Now, just so happens, not too far down the road, Mulder has taken up a residence in an area in his car. There have been reports of UFO sightings or lights up in the skies, and so that gains the attention of the sheriff, who's another main character, who pulls over, and he just assumes Mulder is some sort of drug dealer or something. And once he asks for his ID, and Mulder just has that look, and he gives it to him, and the guy's like, oh, you want a case? And he's like, nah, just watching for UFOs, got reports. And sheriff's like, FBI keep track of that kind of stuff? And Mulder real quick's like, no. And he's just, you could tell he's little more than slightly perturbed with this, which is so funny. And it works through the rest of the episode, his annoyance with the sheriff, which is really funny. A few comments that he'll make to him. But this guy, he says, well, can I ask you why your windshield wipers are on? It's a beautiful day, beautiful night, no rain or anything. And Mulder's like, I got bugs on my, I'm really, as soon as he says that, man, bugs on the windshield, cop steps back, hand on the holster, and Mulder's kind of like, okay. And he's like, what was it, cockroach? And he's like, I don't know. I don't know bugs real well. And he's like, oh, just hold that thought. And so his car radio's going off or whatever. He goes to his car, and then he swings his car around, comes up, and he's like, gives him back his ID. He's like, I'm sorry for disturbing you tonight. Gotta go or whatever. Mulder's like, what's the problem? He goes, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he, something to the effect of a cockroach attack or something. Well, Mulder's there really because his building, as it would happen, is where he lives is being fumigated. So he's out there, right? So he's like, got nothing better to do. So he trails after, and the sheriff lets him into the crime scene. At that point, he calls Scully, clues her in as to, hey, I might have stumbled into something kind of weird. But every single point, Scully will reply with, well, seems an awful lot like the person died of this. Seems a lot like, because there's a number of victims, that are cockroach victims. And at every point, Mulder's like, I think you got to get up here. I think you got to get up here. And Scully's like, it sounds like, if it's not anaphylaxis, maybe, there's one who, we got a couple stoners that are making up their own little concoction in the basement of their house or whatever. And two of them, could have sworn I wrote their names down. Tyler Labine, who plays a stoner, and girl Nicole, they'll reappear together in both Quagmire and Mulder and Scully meet the Weir Monster later on. So that's kind of cool that they reprise themselves like that. And we are, by the way, in a place called Miller's Grove, Massachusetts, is where we're at. And so, along the way, so you got they got the concoction, and the kid is just stoned out of his mind, and he starts having this hallucination that cockroaches are burrowing into his skin. He totally freaks out, has a Hellbound Hellraiser 2 moment, if you know that movie, and immediately begins to cut himself, man, to get the roaches out of his arm. Of course, he ends up severing the artery, he ends up dying. But every turn like this, there's just a string of victims. And along the way, some absolutely beautifully written comedic moments. Mulder will end up at this place. The sheriff tells him about, how do you not know that the government's been doing some crazy experiments out here under the guise of the Department of Agriculture? And Mulder is just like, I don't know everything, buddy. And of course, so he goes out to investigate. And of course, Scully, does the whole, you're not going to trespass on government property again, are you? And he's too late. I'm already in the house. In which case, he starts to observe a room full of cockroaches that seem to be coming out of the walls. Well, in comes Dr. Bambi, who is I can't remember. I guess she claims she works with the FDA, maybe. So he is smitten by this girl almost immediately. And there's this great scene when they're in her little laboratory, and she's sort of telling him how she thinks UFO sightings are really just clusters of insects that are emitting off like static electrocurrent lights, different colored lights or whatever, which has its effect. And it's so funny to watch Mulder's expression on his face as he listens to her almost kind of tearing apart his whole world view right in front of him. But he's so smitten by her. And somewhere at this point, there's a call between him and Scully. Scully starts to get this, this sixth sense comes up where she starts to realize, wait a minute, there may be a girl involved here. I got to get up there. So, of course, she'll eventually make her way up there. By the point Scully gets up there, she'll arrive at a convenience store on the outskirts of the town. And people are just absolutely, just nuts, man. It's like a scene out of a movie, man. Like a crazy end of the world apocalyptic type movie where, something is just exploded and people are just in panic mode. And there's a great moment where these two girls are fighting over the last can of bug spray. And she ends up pushing the one girl over, and she knocks over a stand of, it looks like it should be like Whoppers or something. I don't know, chocolate goobers or something. And suddenly the entire store panics because they're all sharing the hallucination that they're cockroaches. So it just kind of tailspins continually out of control. By the time you get to the final confrontation of Mulder and this Dr. Icaro, he'll also have a meeting with a doctor that works there in the town in another building complex. And he basically works on robotics, insect-like robotics. And they have this interesting conversation where, the guy believes that, robotics will be the mechanics of space exploration, not mankind. And he makes this, and the whole show really is aimed at jabs at Mulder. It's so funny. He's just like, if you really, those people really think that if another civilization were to suddenly show up here, big black weird bug eyes and weird, they watch too much science fiction. And then Mulder's just kind of like, it's just like one rib after another. But one thing I didn't mention, there's a cockroach that Mulder is able to get his hands on. And you don't really know if it's a hallucinatory effect that he shares in, and therefore the other, but he believes, and the doctor, Ivanov, believes that these cockroaches, some of them are mechanical, and that sort of instigates the conversation about that. And so you kind of got that in the middle of the episode, which is really pretty cool. It also plays a lot. The episode plays a lot off of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, the radio adaptation in '38. And so I mentioned arachnophobia. Had to have been an influence. It's pretty obvious. It was an influence of sorts. And like I said, it all sort of ends back in Ecaro's plant where the dung plant is. And the dude just goes insane, man. He thinks Mulder is a walking cockroach and just starts firing off his gun. Of course, it's a methane plant, so he shoots some things off, and the plant ultimately ends up exploding, and leads to one of the last great moments where the sheriff, when Mulder and Scully are outside the plant in the end, in the aftermath. Of course, dung has just flown everywhere as a result of the explosion, and Mulder and Scully are just covered in dung. And the sheriff just says, you know what, you guys really need to just go home and get a break, get some rest. Y'all look pooped out. It's just, these lines just litter the show, man. And you got Dr. Bambi getting hooked up with Dr. Ivanov, which is just such a weird combination. But it just serves as just a weird, oddball episode that's just so much fun for all the little tiny things they do. The cinematography in this episode is unreal. Just the angles and where the camera's looking and how we see our main characters. It's just it's just a real treat. And I would say this as a recommended other watch to go along with this. Oh man, what was the episode called in the Creepshow film, the original Creepshow film that deals with cockroaches? That would be a nice little appendage off of this episode, as well as maybe arachnophobia, just for some of the things I've already mentioned. So this episode, man, was pretty amazing coming out of the gates in the new year, 1996. And it's only going to get better and better and better. The next episode, in fact, number 13, I did take a quick little glance. I don't even dare try to say it right now. It's just one of those titles, another one of those titles. But a great loose translation of this title would be War of the Dung Eaters. I kind of like that better. So anyways, as always, we end these things off with Go Bills.
This is not a dream. Not a dream.
We might be useful to you.